And we're live. Kolale.
All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kolale Skandanyan with the SPARK Hub. And today we are going to continue the discussion on pediatric medical countermeasures, navigating the regulatory landscape. The first of the series was presented by Dr. Daniela Drago a few weeks ago. And today we're going to hear more from Dr. Susan Alpert, and we're going to follow up with Q&A, beginning from the questions that I have for the panel, and then we will open up for Q&A from the audience. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Daniela Drago, our regulatory strategy expert for drugs and biologics, and Dr. Susan Alpert, our regulatory strategy expert for medical devices and diagnostics. And with that, Dr. Alpert, would you like to tell us more about yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm a pediatric infectious disease specialist with a PhD in medical microbiology by training, but I spent my career as a regulator, first at the Food and Drug Administration, drugs on the drug side first, and then I was responsible for the pre-market side of medical devices for 6 years, and then I did a year in foods. And then I worked in the medical device industry. So I've worked on both sides of the issues of regulating products, particularly medical devices coming into the US market, but I work rather broadly with pharma, biotech, and other types of companies bringing products into the US.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alpert. Dr. Drago?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. And my name is Daniela Drago. During the last 20 plus years, I also had the privilege to contribute to the development and approval of products across different modalities, so small molecules, biologics, and cell and gene therapies, different geographies in the US, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Latin America, and in multiple rare and common disease areas. I spent a couple of decades in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, where most recently I served as the chief regulatory officer in a biotech company. So I'm familiar with the dynamics of small organizations. But most of my careers, I held the global regulatory roles in larger companies like, for example, Hoffmann La Roche Genentech and Biogen. I was also in academia for nearly a decade. I served as an associate professor at the School of Medicine at George Washington University, where I now have an adjunct appointment in the Department of Pediatrics. Really excited to be with you today and looking forward to the discussions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Drago. I will introduce a brief context to frame our today's discussion, and then we'll immediately dive into Dr. Alpert's presentation. So as we know, pediatric populations have historically been underrepresented in the development of medical devices in general, but medical countermeasures in particular, whether for pandemics, radiological threats, or biosecurity. So today we're going to dive into how innovators can navigate the FDA landscape for these products, both for drugs and biologics, as well as devices and diagnostics. And with that, Dr. Alpert, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the first thing I'd say, if you know one part of FDA, you know one part of FDA. We can go to the next slide. The fact of the matter is that, to the next slide. Yeah, the fact of the matter is that the laws, the regulation, the structure, and the way that interactions happen are different if you are working with CDER, which is the drug center, CBER, which is the biologics center, or CDRH, which is the device center. So a lot of that stems from the fact that the law is actually different for each one. So it's just my comment is, when you're developing a product and you understand what type of product it is, you need to look at what kind of regulation will that be. There are many products that are partly one product and part another. So a unique way of delivering a drug can be a combination product. It can be needed to be evaluated by the drug center and by the device center, depending on the understanding of what the product itself is that's active in the body, and also the way it's delivered. If there's a unique delivery system, a unique carrier system, a unique way of delivering a product, then it can be a combination. So that's just a little background for those who haven't interacted yet with FDA. It requires some preliminary preparation and understanding of the FDA, and I'm going to try to walk us through that quite quickly. But I will tell you that the good news is that FDA has extremely detailed information on the website. It's not always easy to get to, but there is a at the FDA website. Each of the centers has a website. There's lots of information on the websites, and there's lots of other information online from consulting groups and so forth. Take advantage of that if you're looking at putting a new product in the market, so that you have an understanding before you sit down with the regulators. Next slide. So one of the interesting things about medical devices, and I'm going to focus, as you've heard, on the medical device side, and Daniela is going to talk a little bit more about, or answer questions about the pharma biologic side, although, we both will chime in. On the device side, because of the large number, if you think about the large number of devices that are used in the healthcare environment, everything from syringes and tongue depressors to MRI machines to cardiovascular implants, the range is extremely wide, as is the risk. So on the device side, there are different regulatory tools depending on the risk of the specific product. There are some products that are such low risk that you have to follow the rules, you have to develop all the data, but FDA doesn't need to see that data unless there's a problem. So even if you're an exempt product, meaning FDA doesn't need to give you permission to market, and that's for the lowest risk products, and some sort of moderate risk products, which FDA has decided they don't need to see before they go to market. You have to have all of that information. You have to have all the documentation, even if FDA doesn't have to give you permission to go to market. Otherwise, you have to make some form of submission and get FDA's approval for entering the market. On the device side, the first 510K, the numbers are just parts of the law. So when we talk about a 510K, it's actually a pre-market clearance. It's a specific type of submission. It's an abbreviated type of submission where you compare yourself to something that's already in the market that's very similar, does the same thing, similar technology. You just show that you're similar enough and FDA can say yes. If you are low risk or moderate risk and there's nothing in the market like you, but you can show that the risks are really low, there's a process for becoming the first of a kind device going into the market. De novo just means from new. I know because we helped pick it, the title when I was at FDA. It just means it's new. But that's also for low and moderate risk products. And for each of these levels, the amount of information that you need to provide to FDA is reasonably low. It's not zero. It's not a few pages, but it's reasonably low. If you have a high-risk device, especially a brand new kind of high-risk device, that's a pre-market approval, PMA, pre-market approval. That's extensive. It's everything about the development, everything about the testing of the product, everything about the materials, everything about the manufacturing, and animal studies and human studies. So depending on your level of risk, there are different amounts of data and different kinds of data you'll need to provide to FDA on the device side. It's a unique kind of system, but as I said, everything is online. You can find it and learn about it really quickly. Next slide. So what does FDA do with pediatrics? Well, pediatrics are well recognized as a unique population, which you've probably already heard from Daniela before. That is a good thing for us in the pediatric space because, as we know, and FDA on the device side recognizes as well, is that infants are not like young children, are not like teenagers. Each of those age groups presents different benefits and different risks from technology. And so the kind of data that's needed will include data of the use of the product in the age group for which you intend it to be used, or the age groups for which you intend it to be used. Again, great guidance documents are online. And as you're going to hear, FDA also is very willing to do interactive work with companies, particularly with new companies and startups, in a number of ways, which I'm going to talk about. But they do expect you to do your homework and go online first. See what you can find. But they do understand, and as we all understand, growing children, developing children are very different than the adult population. So the risk of even an implant, if someone's growing, does it get healed in place? Does it need to be replaced when they're grown? If it's delivering something to the body, is it programmable so that the amounts of material it's delivering, that if it's an implanted drug pump, for example, can it deliver the amounts that it needs to for the child as they grow? All of these things are important considerations when you design your device. Next slide, please. The good news is that FDA continuously develops new programs. And these new programs are designed to help us in the industry to interact with them. It also helps them, of course, but it helps us to interact with them. It helps us to learn and be sure that we're taking the right pathway for our product so that when we're ready, when we have everything developed, all of the information developed, we can get to market in an efficient fashion. It's not always quick, but in an efficient fashion. So a number of things that they've done, and this particularly applies to things like countermeasures. FDA has a program. If your product is for something that's life-threatening or seriously debilitating, you can apply to be in a breakthrough program. Breakthrough products are products that, as it says, diagnose or treat life-threatening diseases when there's nothing available for them, or there's nothing like this available for them. So you can apply to be in that program. And then if you're accepted in the program, there's a lot of interaction between you and FDA. And FDA's rules are set up to be fair across the whole industry. Daniela talked about working for some big companies. On the medical device side, I worked for Medtronic, which is, one of the three largest in the world. But I now work with startup companies having a single product. These programs are designed so that everybody is treated equally. It's first in, first review. If you submit your application to FDA, it doesn't matter whether you're Medtronic or J&J or you're a startup. You get in line and it's done by date. And the teams work against timelines. If you have something really unique, like we're talking about here, you go to the head of the line if you get into the breakthrough program. That's what it's for. It's to move you to the head of the line each time you submit so that you have an interactive, very much faster program. But you have to meet these criteria. Next slide. More on new programs. There are a number of new programs. So if you don't make breakthrough, maybe it's not life-threatening. The countermeasures tend to be, but let's say you have something that's supportive and not necessarily treating a life-threatening disease. there's something called the Safer Technologies Program. If your product is better than what's in the market, safer, and that applies broadly in pediatrics. Frequently, a pediatric product is going to be safer for the pediatric patients than what's available out there now. That program, very similar to the breakthrough program, you move up in the line. It means you have expedited access and expedited interactions with the FDA review teams. These are very important things because timelines matter to us as we develop new products, particularly for serious conditions. So there are a number of programs that can move you more quickly or more interactively. Another program, and I didn't put it on the slide, is called TAP. Every program they design has an acronym. The TAP program is Total Product Lifecycle Advisory Program. Whew. What does that mean? It means if you are a breakthrough device, you can do just breakthrough, or you can apply to be in this special program called TAP, where you get a specific advisor. Now, FDA is not able to tell you what to do. That's a law. They're not allowed to tell you what to do. So as a company, you can't come in and say, gee, this is my product, what do I do? You have to propose to them. But once you propose to them, they can interact with you and give advice and move you more quickly. And that's exactly what TAP is for. And TAP goes beyond just regulation. They work on the regulation, but they bring in the medical community. They bring in the payers. They bring in the patient groups to the discussion. So if you're accepted in breakthrough and then in TAP, FDA will facilitate some of those interactions. Again, they won't tell you what to do, but they'll create the environment where you can find out what's needed, how to work with the company, how to work with the medical community, how to work with the patients in order to move your product more quickly into the market. And more, not just more quickly, but with all of the most appropriate ways of talking about the product, of demonstrating the product, and of using the product. So there's lots of programs that FDA has, particularly on the device side, that helps you move more quickly if you have a countermeasure for a vulnerable population, particularly if it's life-threatening. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about today. Pediatric countermeasures for serious life-threatening conditions where there's nothing there. We need something new, and it's directly for the pediatric group. Another thing that happens from my last slide, go to the next one. Some things are not new, and some things are new. One thing that's really important, and I alluded to it, but I really want to emphasize it, and that is FDA in all the centers has programs where you can speak to them before you submit. Pre-submission programs, a way to go in and have a discussion with FDA. Again, they're not going to tell you what to do, but they can be a sounding board for what you're planning and give you advice as to whether that's going to work, or there's another program you should think about, or there's something else that you should be doing. These pre-submission opportunities are critically important, particularly if you're a new company or you have a new product that's really unique. It gives you a chance to educate the FDA. It gives them a chance to educate you. They're shorter. They're usually 60 days from the time you request the meeting until you get the meeting. But those meetings, they bring the review team. You get feedback, and it's formal/informal. It's not final decisions, but it can be very helpful to tell you what your options are, what the timeframes will be, the kinds of information that they're going to need to see once you tell them what your plans are. Really, really important to take advantage of those pre-submission programs. The other thing that's that's important is, FDA, as part of their funding, once you make an actual submission asking for approval, there's a user fee. There's a fee that companies pay, smaller fees for small companies with, for the first time submitter, larger fees for bigger companies. But there's no charge for talking to FDA. Pre-submissions have no fee. That's a really important key issue. You can get to talk to them. You can use them as a sounding board. You can more efficiently plan when you talk to them. Another thing is, I mentioned earlier as well, FDA publishes lots of guidance. You have to know how to find it on their website. The website is sometimes a little complicated, especially for those of us like me. I'm not a techie to start with. I'm not an IT person. But they have a lot of guidance development. So you can look for guidance. And the guidance is whether it's general guidance on the type of submission or specific guidance for a particular disease or guidance for the programs that I've already spoken about. They exist for all of the FDA centers, and they're really important and they're really helpful. And they tell you when they were published and things like that. And they give you a contact person. Those are all critically important as you're developing new things particularly in new healthcare situations, like where new countermeasures are needed, and particularly for populations like pediatrics. My last bullet point is sort of a reminder. FDA staff is trained and educated. They've got their degrees. If they're an engineer, they've got their engineering degree. If they're a doctor, they have their MD and so forth. They have the backgrounds. But the majority of people at FDA have never worked in industry. There are some, but the majority have never worked in industry. So they don't know what your life is like. They don't know what developing the product is like. They don't know what working in, whether it's a small company, a startup, 10 people, 30 people, or the big guys, the hundreds, the thousands of people. They don't know. They don't know. They also, most of them haven't worked in academia. So if you're an academic developer, they don't know about that. You have to understand that you have to tell them a bit about your development program, about your team, because they don't know. They're great in their specific area and from a regulatory perspective, but they don't necessarily know from your perspective. So you have to communicate. You have to be able to communicate. The last thing I would say is take advantage, ask people use your friends, use your advisors, use your faculty, use people. We all understand that each product is a new product, and it sometimes takes a real team with advisors from the outside to help. And I'm going to stop there and turn it back to Kaleli.
Thank you, Dr. Alpert. Fascinating. I would like to start an opening framing question for both of you, Dr. Alpert and Dr. Drago. How would you each define a pediatric medical countermeasure in your respective fields? And how does the regulatory journey might be different for pediatric medical countermeasures? And Dr. Alpert, you already covered some of this, but very briefly, each of you, please. Maybe we'll start with.
I would suggest that Daniela go first, and then we can talk about. Then when I'll talk about devices and combinations.
That's great. Thank you.
Sounds good. So, in a big picture, pediatric medical countermeasures are FDA-regulated products that may be used in children in the event of, for example, a potential public health emergency or a naturally occurring emerging disease. What does it mean? First off, obviously, those are essential for our national security and for public health. And they are used typically to address health effects that may come from chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear threats, as well as infectious diseases like, for example, the pandemic. So medical countermeasures, as you can imagine or deduce, are indeed drugs, biologics, devices. So there is a plethora of different type of FDA regulatory regulated products. And I think then to the part of the question about how does the regulatory journey differs, as both Colale and Susan mentioned, the challenges that we face in this area is that children are not small adults. And so this is really important, for example, in the regulatory journey for a drug or biologic, because the metabolism, the clearance, the organ function can change dramatically, like Susan said, from neonates to adolescents. And so this is something that really informs how you think of pediatric medical countermeasures that are classified as drug or biologics, and then bring them through the journey. Susan, what would you add?
I would add, we didn't talk a lot about, I didn't talk a lot about diagnostics, but diagnostics are also regulated. So if you have a good diagnostic, but the diagnostic may need to be, you may need to have different thresholds of your diagnostic, depending on the age of the patient, the type of sample that it is. Is it blood? Is it serum? Is it urine? Is it a sample from an eye or a nose, a swab? What are we doing? And so each of those is also regulated. And you need to bring, for those, you really need to bring data. You need to show the difference between patients who are severely ill, less ill, and maybe just carriers. All of those things need to be evaluated. So I would add that.
Good point.
Thank you so much. So next we're going to talk about early strategy and avoiding some of the pitfalls. Dr. Alpert, you talked about the pre-submission process and many tools that are available through the FDA. So here we'll start with Dr. Drago to talk about the pre-IND, which is the equivalent of pre-sub for drugs and biologics. What are some of the common avoidable regulatory missteps that the companies should know about?
Yeah, I think that if I think of academic entrepreneurs or new companies, what I really find in my experience being a big mistake is to miss the opportunity to go for a pre-IND meeting with the agency. And Susan did a great job to articulate what are all the advantages, but at the same time, and those apply to pre-INDs as well. But really, the way that I think about this is that a pre-IND meeting is an opportunity to interact with the agency and receive insights and feedback, as Susan was articulating, not necessarily as that they would tell you what to do, but rather provide feedback on what are your plans. And so some of the objectives of a pre-IND meeting and where a pre-IND meeting can help is that it can help identify and avoid unnecessary studies. It can ensure in a way that the proposed studies that you are putting vis-a-vis the agency are well designed, and you can obtain their support and start to build a relationship, like she was mentioning. So what I also think that then I would consider you, or encourage you to consider when you do that, and what are some of the best practices to try to avoid not having a pre-IND, or having one that is not meaningful, or having an IND submission that is not successful, is to think about using the right amount of data. So do not overload your pre-IND request, briefing document, or even with your IND with unnecessary information. Ensure that the data that you're presenting is clear and presented in a way that is concise. The second best practice I would mention is to make sure that you have the right expert at the table, so that you really are well prepared and understand all the potential risks, so that you can minimize those. And do not underestimate the importance of a well-crafted document. So when you are interacting with the agency, a lot of that interactions, at least at the beginning, is also in written form. And I think it's really helpful when you use plain language, when you organize the information in a way that where you're highlighting what are key messages, where you're trying not to make the job of the reviewer hard. The easier you can make it for them, the better it's for the system and ultimately for you as well.
Awesome. Can you
I'd add,
yeah, please.
if I can add two, I'd add two things because Danielle did really covered it all. It all applies on the device side as well. They're called pre-subs. There can be a pre-IDE, which is investigational device exemption. The paired to the IND. Remember that it's helpful to tell them what your questions are. What do you need to know from them? So they bring the right people to the table. And be able to be very clear that you get an hour if you're lucky. You don't want 25 questions. You want 3 or 4 or 5 critical questions that clearly that you need response to in order to move ahead, so that they will be prepared when they come to the meeting to answer those questions. And as I said, bring the right people. And they will bring the actual review team, the actual people who will be reviewing whether it's your drug, your biologic, or your device. So you will begin, as you've heard, it's a way of getting the team to know your product and you to know the team that's going to review and get that feedback. Critical.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to go back to Daniela and ask if you can elaborate on the difference between the INTERACT program and a pre-IND. So INTERACT stands for Initial Targeted Engagement for Regulatory Advice.
Excellent. Yes, those are two distinct meeting types that serve at different stages of drug development. Those are both very early development meetings, but they have different purposes. So the INTERACT meeting targets a very specific development stage that is very early, when you have identified already your investigational product and already have kind of a preliminary proof of concept data, but you did not design your definitive toxicology studies yet, or might have designed them but did not conduct them yet. So you can use an INTERACT as an engagement with the agency this early that can basically bridge early discovery and IND enabling studies. So those used to be called pre-IND meetings, and that tells a lot. The pre-IND meetings that is typically conducted, let's say, 3 to 6 months before your IND submission. So here you already have completed or near completed IND enabling studies. You have already a more defined also manufacturing and might have very specific protocol questions. But like Susan was also saying earlier, what's really important is to use this engagement to de-risk what are potential issues that you might have already identified, or things that you believe might, for example, trigger a clinical hold or might accelerate your program.
Thank you so much. So we're going to jump onto the next category of regulatory risk and clinical holds. So for Susan, if you can talk to us about challenges like refuse to accept RTA decisions or investigational device exemption disapprovals, and how do you compare those and how can they be avoided? And then I'll go back to Daniela to ask about clinical holds. Let's say your IND application was accepted, now what? Yes.
So FDA can say no. Not a surprise. They can say no at the time you submit. Refuse to accept means you've submitted and it's not complete. It's missing something that they need in order to complete the review. And what that means is it hasn't been reviewed. They looked at it and said, we can't give it to the team because there's missing pieces. That adds time. That adds time. So your job is to make sure that you've addressed all of the, when you make an IND or an IDE submission, that all of the components, that you look at all of the segments, that you've provided the background information that's needed so that they can approve your trial. Remember that you can't, in the United States, you can't do clinical trials for anything but really low risk product on the device side without FDA approval of the IDE and the IRB. So you always need the IRB, and 90% of the time or 95% of the time you also need FDA. On the device side, there are products that are low enough risk that FDA doesn't need to give you permission to do the study, but they're very low risk. Countermeasures won't count. Countermeasures won't be low risk. So that's the issue, is you need to, but if they look at it and they say there's a missing piece, they send it back to you. That takes time. Another reason for doing the pre-submissions, the pre-IDE work, is that you tell them everything you're going to do and they'll tell you if there's anything missing before you submit. Because getting a refuse to accept when you've done all the work and then have to go back and then have to submit it again and you have to wait another 30 days, that's very difficult for companies. What was the second part, Kaleli?
Second part, we go back to Daniela and ask about clinical holds. If you can tell us a little bit more about that in the context of drugs biologics.
Sure. So differently, clinical hold is defined as an order of, that is issued by the FDA to a sponsor to either suspend or delay a clinical investigation. And because some of you might know also an IND de facto is never approved. You cannot approve an IND. An IND can be cleared or in effect, because by the statute, what the reason why, what is the purpose of an IND is to basically allow for your development product to go across state lines. So there is a legal reason of having an IND. But in terms of I think you asked about what are some of the typical reasons for sponsors to get on hold. Is overwhelmingly, especially most recently, there is a lot of literature about this. It's product quality and safety concerns, particularly for first-in-humans trials and for advanced therapies, so gene and cell therapies. And indeed, there are a lot of papers. Some of them have also been authored by FDA colleagues. And so if you are interested in this topic, I would encourage you to look at some, for example, from Dr. Lapteva. And then Dr. Manning also has a couple on FDA analysis of what type of deficiencies, although in this case, I think he was mostly focusing on oncology products. But again, there is a lot around those type of evaluations, and those are helpful to new sponsors because then you can learn from others' mistakes.
Okay. Thank you so much. Please.
I would add two things. One is, because when you're doing a study, whether it's a device, a drug, or a biologic, you have to annually tell FDA how it's going. In addition, if you have serious adverse events, you have to report them within a few days. So you've got, FDA is watching the safety issues. It's not like it waits to the end. It's an ongoing process when you're in the middle of your clinical work. So there's interaction there, and that's where they can put you on hold. and it becomes visible.
Right.
It's reported, it's documented. So you need to report timely, and you need to be prepared for the kinds of questions and issues that will come up when you have safety issues during a clinical trial.
Thank you, Dr. Alpert. Now, let's say a team receives a letter of IDE disapproval or a clinical hold. As a follow-up, what are some of the important questions that they should ask the FDA to stay engaged and learn?
I can start. So typically the way that it works is that the first time that a company or an IND sponsors finds out about a clinical hold for a drug or a biologic, typically is a clinical hold notification call from the FDA. So they call you. And it's really important at that call to ask very specific questions. And I would encourage you to think of two that are really important. One is you want to find out if the hold is a full hold or a partial hold. I can talk more about this if you're interested. But the most important one I find is what are FDA's specific concerns? Because for if it's the first time, you might not realize that the FDA has 30 calendar days to provide a detailed listing of why it wants to impose this clinical hold. And so this puts pressure on the person that is taking the phone call because you want to learn as much as possible during that brief conversation so that you can inform then the rest of your team and start strategizing on the next steps.
Yeah, it's really important to understand what are their expectations for you to address that, whatever that issue is. And when can you speak with them? So make sure that it's a more interactive process so that you can respond efficiently and re-engage in starting the study. Because when they put you on hold, it means you have to stop everybody from entering new patients. And that can be a real problem, not just that it's visible, but stopping a study and then restarting a study is complicated. It's complicated at every site. It's the IRB, it's the investigators, it's the ongoing patients. So you really want to do this as efficiently as possible and really understand what you need to tell the sites the problem is, because they may or may not have been paying attention to something FDA said. But it's really important because restarting studies can be even more difficult than starting them the first time.
Very true.
Thank you. Very important. We'll jump into the next topic of FDA acceleration tools. And Dr. Alpert, you covered that in your opening presentation. So perhaps we'll start with Dr. Drago about some of the tools that are available to drugs biologics developers of medical countermeasures for pediatrics. And then maybe Susan, you can also summarize, those important tools such as TAP, STEP, BDD. But for drugs biologics, those are model-informed drug development and complex innovative trial design. So could you please talk to us about that?
Absolutely. So for those of you that were at the first session where I provided more of a frontal lecture, there I spoke about fast track, breakthrough therapy designation, accelerated approval, and priority review. And so we thought that for this panel discussion, to give you a little bit more insights indeed on the MIDD peer meeting programs and on the CID pilot. I need to admit, I am a huge fan of the MIDD peer program. And I think that it can be particularly valuable for pediatric medical countermeasures because it allows you to use modeling and simulations to bridge, for example, adult data to strategies for your pediatric population. So, for example, an MIDD can support PK modeling to predict pediatric dosing from adult data, population PK modeling to optimize the dosing across different pediatric age groups. It can also be used for disease progression modeling to inform, for example, clinical trial endpoints. And what I also really like of this paired meeting structure is that it basically gives you kind of 2 bites at the apple. What I mean with that, you have an initial meeting where you can discuss your modeling approach. You include typically your MIDD plan in the briefing document for your first meeting. But then you have a follow-up meeting to present the results of your plan, and you get FDA agreement on how these models support your regulatory strategy. And there are now a lot of case examples where this has been really very supportive for regulatory decision-making.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Alford.
It's similarly, there are similar programs. They all have different names for devices and drugs, but they, again, the Device Center, in fact, recently announced that they're using AI to look at background information. So the reviewers won't have to read all the literature. They can use AI to tell them what the literature says about the area and then move forward more efficiently, we hope. So these kinds of tools, there's also, and has been for a while on the device side, the ability to use published data and other types of early feasibility data in order to advance your trials. So early feasibility trials are very small. It's a way of getting permission from FDA to expose maybe 5 patients or 10 patients to your product, collect some of that data, and fine-tune your clinical trial. So early feasibility is another one of those tools to be able to move more quickly, because you can start with a product that isn't locked down yet because you're still trying to figure out aspects of it, but you can expose a small number of people and learn. Really important tools.
Thank you so much. We'll jump into the next topic of hot topics and transparency. So FDA recently announced its intention to publicly release complete response assessment, CRA letters, for certain marketing applications. So yesterday in our prep meeting, I heard that it's not really new. It was done before. But what are the pros and cons for pediatric medical countermeasure developers, especially small companies and academic teams?
Susan, do you want to take this one? You want me to start? You tell me.
I'll start. You'll talk from the other from experience side as well. I think the most important thing about these issues is impact on the company. More things are being made more visible to other investigators, to other companies, and to potential patients. This kind of data has been available, but you had to know to look for it. When FDA proactively announces things like this, and proactively, and they will, say that they've got this letter or they have that letter going public or they've published something, it can have a huge impact. So first, it can be a great learning for you as a company to see what they're doing to everybody else. But it also means that you need to be very aware of how that information, if such an event happens to you, how that information will impact your studies. You have to be in good communication with your investigators. That's something you should do anyway, is have really good communication with your investigators so that when things happen, you can go to them and you can have the conversation. You can say how you are responding. It's not excuses. It's how are you responding to what was identified, to the kind of information that FDA is providing. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is indeed that for drugs and biologics that ultimately got approved, then if they were not approved for cycle, but they had received a complete response letter before the approval, those complete response letters are already publicly available. You just need to know where to look for them, as Susan was mentioning. But the most recent announcement, the one that was done just earlier this month, was to have a real-time release of complete response letters for pending applications. And this would be a major shift. But there are also very significant legal questions about FDA's authority to do this in the first place. So this policy may face some challenges. And so we'll be watching.
Especially, complete responses that are positive is one thing. Complete responses that say you didn't do something have the other impact.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So we're going to jump into closing reflections before we open the floor to questions from the audience. So question for both of you. If you could change one thing at the FDA to better support pediatric medical countermeasures, what would that be?
More pediatric people.
Yes.
No, seriously, on the device side,
yes. Yeah.
some additional pediatric people and some more. They've been working on it. They've had a lead pediatric officer. Unfortunately, he left the agency now, but there'll be another pediatric officer. And those are really important for us. But expanding that and having more emphasis and more discussion from the FDA on pediatrics would be really helpful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Susan. I think, though, as I was reflecting on this question and I wanted to think big, I thought I believe it would be extremely valuable to think about creating a formal pathway for early agreement on pediatric medical countermeasure development plans. What do I mean with that? Because it's a mouthful. I am thinking about a formal mechanisms that would be similar to a special protocol assessment and an MIDD peer meeting, but broader in scope, so that there could be more of a proactively agreement on the entire pediatric development strategy for a pediatric drug or biologic, and this could codify what specific modeling, simulation, or limited clinical studies that would be needed upfront. Because reflecting on some of the learnings, for example, from the anthrax monoclonal antibody history, where there was a really big challenge to establish that pediatric plan, I think that to think about something like this, focusing on pediatric medical countermeasure, could be a really interesting policy discussion.
And it should be broadly across FDA. It should be all three centers should be talking about and having the collaboration about managing products for pediatrics in that setting, because all of the centers are involved.
I like that, Susan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll open questions for the audience. And Kamran, if you can read those, that would be great. My Teams is asking me to log in. So you may lose me for a second while I log in.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do. And attendees have the option to unmute themselves and ask a question. So if you're interested, just please raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask question directly. While you do that and mull over your questions, we do have a question in the Q&A box from Marnie. She says, is there a resubmission meeting for a special 510K?
Always. Yes, there are pre-submission meetings for every, on the device side, you can have pre-submission meetings for any submission that you're going to make to FDA. Now, sometimes they'll say, you ask for a pre-submission meeting and they say, we'll do it only in writing. They have the ability to say that. But the approach is available. Yes, even for a special 510K.
Okay. And how is that initiated with the FDA?
With a request, everything now is online. You write a meeting request and
Okay.
just tell them what it's for.
Okay.
So that they bring the right people. And special 510K, just for the audience, a special 510K is when you're changing your own device. You already have a device in the market and you're making modifications, that you can do a pre-sub for that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Great.
Anytime.
We have a question from Dory Jones. Our tool is a monitoring device, not diagnostic, but it does teeter on diagnostics. Susan, can you please comment on how FDA recognizes the difference between the two?
It's still treated as in the group that does diagnostics, because it's looking at that kind of information. But monitoring devices are devices because they have thresholds. They're providing information upon which the clinicians are going to base care. So they're regulated. They're likely to be class 1 or class 2. And many of them are in that exempt category I talked about. You have to develop it. You have to develop the data. You have to label it the appropriate way. But FDA doesn't look at every single one of them. But that's very specific about depending on the disease state, depending on the population, and depending on the risk.
Thank
Dory,
you.
I hope that answers your question. Selena, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. I'm Selena. I'm the CEO of Fetal Therapy Technologies, and we're a microsurgical device company developing instruments specialized for fetal surgery to make fetal surgery safer. And thank you so much, Dr. Alpert and Daniela, for your wonderful webinar. My question is about the STEP program that you mentioned, Dr. Alpert. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Is that specifically for pediatric devices? And can you talk about how those safety metrics are measured? You mentioned it has to be safer than the clinical standard, but how is that evaluated?
Okay, so what happens with these programs with both Breakthrough and STEP is you apply for them before you've developed a lot of information. You have to, for STEP, it's not life-threatening, but your technology is better than what's in the market. So you have to tell them what's the basis on which you are making that determination, provide some of that data. And there's a really good guidance document on what they want to see in a STEP application. But that's basically it. What they're looking for is, again, these are ways that FDA can expedite the work with a product where there's a real need, where there's nothing that's really doing what this product does, and it's really needed. And so it allows them to take it out of the timeline, work with you in a more interactive way, and therefore get to the market much more quickly. But you have to, as I said, the guidance document will tell you, because I just did a STEP with one of my clients, and that is, here's what we are, here's how it improves the diagnosis or treatment that is currently available. And we want to be in that program. And then you have a pre-sub meeting about it, or they'll do it just in writing. So apply, definitely apply.
So
Great.
thank you so much. Do we have time for one more question? We are at
We're
time.
almost out of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can conclude the webinar here. Big thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights and expertise. Just wanted to mention a reminder, companies in the SPARK Accelerator cohort have the opportunity to attend office hours with our speakers. So if you're interested, please reach out to me directly and I'll be happy to coordinate. With that, thank you, everybody, and we look forward to...
Don't forget your question. I was going to say, if we haven't answered your questions, don't forget to bring them forward.
Yes. Thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at future Spark Hub events.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.